everybody. Thank you so much for coming tonight. For those of you who don't know, my name is Mary Ellen Strom, and I have the great honor of being the director of the Master of Fine Arts program at SMFA, a program that hosts a remarkable group of international emerging artists and an outstanding array of faculty who are themselves world-class artists, scholars, and curators. Tonight is an auspicious event. We are about to experience the 2015 Graduate Colloquium, an important tradition of our MFA program. Tonight's Colloquium For Giving Time has a beautiful title. The event will explore our experience of simultaneous temporalities, transnational ancestralities, and other urgent questions regarding contemporary art, social movements, and global mobility. I want to welcome all of you, our attendees, and encourage you to participate in tonight's conversation. There will be a question and answer period following our speaker's presentation. So before we begin, please let me acknowledge and thank our MFA faculty coordinator of our 2015 event, Carol Stakenas. For all of her hard work, her big brain and big heart that went into conceiving and organizing this event. I want to thank Alana Watson. Where are you, Alana? Yay! From our exhibitions program, who has been tireless in her efforts to make this an outstanding evening. And to our beloved Lisa Bino, our Associate Dean of Graduate Programs, and to Jackie Williams, our Administrative Coordinator of Graduate Programs, that none of this would happen without. I will begin by introducing Dalida Mari Benfield, who has been an essential contributor to the concept and design of For Giving Time. Dalida is here. I will be the most thorough with Dalida's introduction because you will get to know the other participants this evening through their work. Dalida Mari Benfield has a PhD from the University of California at Berkeley in ethnic studies with a designated emphasis in gender, women, and sexuality studies. She also holds an MFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Dalida is an artist, a writer, and a theorist who engages the possibilities of the transformation of the global mediascape through artists' interventions. She produces videos and installations alongside collective projects, experimental archives, artist books, workshops, and other pedagogical actions, crossing online and offline platforms. Dalida is the discussant for our colloquium today. For those of you who are new to colloquia, the discussant is the person who draws connections between or among the presenters. Dalida describes this role, or the act of facilitating transformational conversations, as an important, central part of her creative practice. Dalida's work has been exhibited at the Fact Cultural Center in Rennes, France, at Salazab in Bogota, Colombia, in Pedro Lasch's collective project 5 Decolonial Days in Kassel at Documenta 13, at Espacio Parquedero at Museo del Blanco de la República in Bogota, Colombia, at Arte Nuevo Interactiva at Mérida, Mexico, at Galeria Arsenal in Białystok, Poland, the Frederick Jameson Gallery at Duke University, and the Museum of Contemporary Art in New York City. Dalida is the co-founder of the Collective, the Institute of Impossible Subjects, which is organizing workshops, events, and publications related to the practice of transnational feminist cultural work. She is also the co-founder of Women Archive Media, an experimental online video archive. Recent publications of her writing include the preface to The Arts and Emergent Bilingual Youth, which is Routledge Press, 2013, Flow, and the Decolonial Aesthetics edition of Social Text, Periscope, 2013, and chapters in the book Estéticas Descoloniales in Bogota, Colombia. Also, Mapping Latina Studies and Interdisciplinary Reader, New York, Peter Lang, 2012, Art and Social Justice Education, Culture as Commons, Routledge, 2012, and Making Our Media Global, Initiatives Toward a Democratic Public Sphere, Hampton Press. Dalida is core faculty in the Vermont College of Fine Arts in the MFA in Visual Arts program and a fellow at the Berkman Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University. I am incredibly honored to introduce the Guatemalan American artist Danica Arimany, who generates visual experiments to investigate multiplicity within land use, water pollution, and labor. Arimany is currently a second-year MFA candidate at the School of the Museum of Fine Arts. She has been the recipient of the Tufts University Graduate Student Research Award and the SMFA Montague Travel Grant. Central to this colloquium is Raqs Media Collective. Founded in 1992 by Jibes Bakshi, Monica Narula, and Shuddha Sengupta, the Raqs Media Collective enjoys playing a plurality of roles, often appearing as artists, occasionally as curators, sometimes as philosophical agent provocateurs. Their work, which has been exhibited widely in major international spaces, locates them in the intersections of contemporary art, historical inquiry, philosophical speculation, research, and theory, often taking the form of installations, online and offline media objects, performances, and encounters. They live and work in Delhi, India, based at Sarai CSDS, an initiative they co-founded in 2000. They are members of the editorial collective of the Sarai Reader Series. I'm also thrilled to be able to introduce Robert Sember. He is a member of the international sound art collective Ultra-red. For 20 years, Ultra-red has investigated the contribution experimental sound art can make to political organizing. Sember brings to his work with Ultra-red training in cultural studies and medical anthropology. His ethnographic research in the United States and South Africa has focused on governmental and non-governmental service sectors with an emphasis on HIV/AIDS prevention, testing, and treatment concerns. He currently teaches at the New School's Eugene Lang College in New York City. He was the recipient of a fellowship in 2009-2010 from the Vera List Center of Art and Politics at the New School. And now, Carol Stakenas. Carol is a curator, organizer, and educator whose work is deliberately varied to align artists' practices with new challenges and timely contexts. She has commissioned and produced multidisciplinary public art in remarkable sites, from the Brooklyn Bridge, Anchorage, to the Los Angeles Police Department. Recent signature projects include 3 Weeks in January, a large-scale public artwork by Suzanne Lacey, and scores of Los Angeles-based collaborators concerned with violence against women. And Natalie Bookchin's Now He's Out in Public and Everyone Can See, an 18-channel video installation exploring popular attitudes, anxieties, and conflicts about race. She is currently a member of the SMFA graduate faculty, and boy, are we lucky to have her. And she is serving as interim curator of SMFA exhibitions and public programs. Previously, Carol was the executive director of LACE, the Los Angeles Contemporary Exhibitions, from 2005 to 2013, and deputy director, curator of Creative Time from 1994 to 2003. I want to thank all of our participants. This is just such a remarkable lineup here for all of your efforts tonight. Thank you. And I will now turn this over to Dalida Mari Benfield.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome again, and thanks so much to the graduate program faculty for inviting me to be in conversation with all of you and with Monica, Shuda, Carol, Danica, and Robert. The word colloquium emerges from Latin, combining com, together, and loqui, speaking. It means then a speaking together, a dialogue, an exchange of ideas and images, a moment of producing knowledge together. Often, however, a colloquium can feel more like a soliloquium, a soliloquy, solitary speech of a presenter to a silent listener with little room for colloquy, speaking together. Tonight's colloquium is then intentionally designed with an emphasis on speaking together, on ample and open-ended dialogue. So first, I'm going to open our conversation by sharing with you a few of the ideas that emerge with the phrase, "for giving time," and how these ideas resonate with the work of this amazing roundtable of presenters. Our roundtable discussion will then continue with each one of the participants responding as well to the notion of "for giving time," and following that, posing a question to another presenter. So each presenter has been asked to prepare a question in advance to pose to another. And those questions will form the centerpiece of our dialogue. We'll take a brief break at 8 o'clock and then come back and open the colloquium to all of you. And so with that sense of our itinerary, I begin. In the introduction to his remarkable book, Open Veins of Latin America, 5 Centuries of the Pillage of a Continent, Eduardo Galeano writes the following regarding Latin American histories of colonialisms and the revolutionary experiments of resistance and transformation that continually recur. Perpetuating of the existing order of things is perpetuation of the crime. Recovery of the resources that have always been usurped is recovery of our destiny. The resources of which Galeano writes are not just material and natural resources, human labor, markets for the consumption of imported goods. The resources that have been usurped by multiple histories of coloniality are also resources of knowledge, memories, stories, cultural ways of doing and thinking, cosmologies and worldviews, histories, times and spaces. The book is designed then to recover knowledges to position them in conversation, allowing characters from different times and spaces to speak together. With this radical act of imagination, Galiano exemplifies the agency of the writer, of the artist, to construct the present. Galiano continues in his introduction. When Alexander von Humboldt investigated the customs of the ancient inhabitants of the Bogota Plateau, he found that the Indians called the victims of ritual ceremonies Quihisha. Quihisha meant door. The death of each chosen victim opened the door to a new cycle of 185 moons. This ritual sacrifice, then, was a production of time in a calendar that allowed for continual renewal. We could start again. We were given time. This sense of multiple thresholds of time and people's lives marking those infuses open veins of Latin America. Time is multiple. The Marines are alongside Hernán Cortés. The close proximity of disparate temporal events constructs new times. Such forms of nonlinear time are also those of indigenous calendars. In the Mayan calendar, time does not simply run along a line. Instead, it is a series of repeating circles. As experts on it write, the Maya calendar system has its roots in older Mesoamerican indigenous civilizations, particularly the Olmec. The Maya calendar is complex and serves both practical and ceremonial purposes. The Maya calendar system includes several calendars that measure time periods of varying length. These calendars are based on solar, lunar, planetary, and human cycles. How might we tell our stories with multiple times, with solar, lunar, planetary, and human cycles? In the work of the artists, activists, and organizers with whom we are in conversation tonight, there is an attention to, eliciting for, an investigation of multiple times, and the formulation of ways of telling and making created in the process of giving time to themselves and generously to others, to consider these. What do we learn when we reject a linear time, a linear narrative of history, of the self? When we set aside narratives of modernity, of development, of progress to understand the world's order? Galiano tells us that the linear narratives of global development, the story, for it is a story created by humans, is produced to create the underdeveloped, to put some people ahead in time, more developed than others who remain in the past. As the Raqs Media Collective tells us, there are those who are deliberately obscured in the narrative of progress. There are no memorials for those who fade from view. The missing person is a blur, a decimal point in a statistic, deported, evicted, cast away. No flags flutter, no trumpets sound. And that is from the audio of A Measure of an Acoustic Reason. And what you're seeing is a still from A Measure of an Acoustic Reason, which is an installation with 1 projection, 4 screens, 4 dialogues, 4 lecterns, 4 benches with embedded speakers, and a light box, produced between 2005 and 2007. The luminosities of those who are deliberately obscured, who fade from view, emerge in the work of the Raqs Media Collective. We see them as constellations communicated through multiple forms of media, words, sounds, images, sculptures, performances, conversations. This luminous will, which is the title of Raqs' exhibition at the SMFA that we'll see later tonight. Or perhaps this will to illuminate suggests that we might need astronomy, astrology, intuition, circular time, interlocking circles, repetitive time, overlays, time lapses, ellipses, or fast forwards to tell these stories. We'll also need multiple forms and media, each of which have their own duration. We need each other and others. We might employ cosmonauts to map constellations or recover mythological figures whose coordinates have been forgotten. This materialization of time as a space is, for example, exhibited in the title of their piece, "The Surface of Each Day is a Different Planet," which mobilizes an intergalactic practice of travel and produces a trail of thought, people, spaces, and durations. And I'm going to show just a very brief clip from that piece. Oops. Let's see. Or maybe I'm not. Let's see. Well, this will be the first of many remixed moments in this evening's discussion, because we're going to be switching between various computers as we're doing our talk, so I'm sure that we will come across a few little glitch moments. So let me try one more time to do it. It's telling me there's no input. There we go. I'm just going to play it via QuickTime.
The hunger of the gods knows no limits. Sometimes a story can be as famished as a hungry god. Entire continents can be foraged for a single feast, or for the making of a story. A hungry god wanted an entire forest roasted alive to satisfy him. So he commanded the mightiest warrior of his time to storm the rain clouds with his weapons, and then proceeded to burn the forest to a cinder. He wanted to fill his stomach by emptying a world. Every beast that ever walked in that forest was incinerated as the hungry god feasted. Only a snake, a half-crazed architect of illusions, and 3 philosophical birds were said to have escaped the inferno. All the others, trapped by the fire and with nowhere to run or hide, were burnt where they stood.
It was a crowded cremation.
Was it Canetti who said, "It is strange to observe how strongly for the person struggling with it, the crowd assumes the character of fire"?
The work of Raqs is produced in and produces conversation, speaking together. In their collectivity, Raqs suggests the infinite possibilities of linking new coordinates, nodal points, networks, and spaces, each of which have their own time. In the work of Ultra-red, the collective that Robert Sember works with, There's also a centering of a form of research that requires another sense of time in its commitment to being with others, a slowing down and a listening for sounds of resistance, sounds of struggle. In Ultra-red's attention to the sonic landscape, there's an insistence on the limits of the visible as a form of knowledge. We must pay attention to what is invisible to understand our social conditions, and our listening as a deep form of engagement needs time. It is the time of transformation and the construction of another history that then creates a future of liberation. And I'm going to see if I can show you a tiny clip from Robert's. Let's see if I can do it through.
A listening session is a session in which people come together and they listen. First, they don't speak, they don't touch, they don't see, they turn their other senses off and just listen to the sounds that are being played before them. Then they're asked to reflect on what they heard and just to put out there the first thing that comes to them. What did you hear?
What did you hear? Spaß.
Jazz and dissonance. Straßenfest.
Protest.
Shouty politics.
The slowing down to find what is invisible is also a strategy of Danica, whose recent investigations of riverbanks in her native Guatemala include the project Todavía hay mucho por hacer. There is still much to be done. It is an exploration of the conditions of labor and environment in Guatemala. The artist walks in the required work uniform by the shore of the Las Vacas River, a major outlet for Guatemala City's raw sewage. She collects objects at low tide and lays them on a blue tarp to be disinfected by the sun. A dormant but grumbling dwarf volcano, Cerro Vivo, serves as a backdrop. The orange scars from a recent landslide, which buried 3 men in the first iteration of the hydroelectric project, are still visible upon the landscape. And I think I'll leave it to Danica to show us a clip of that when we move into conversation, which we're just about to do. And Carol Stakenas' recent project, which we're seeing a still from, a restaging of Suzanne Lacey's 1977 project on rape, called 3 Weeks in January, frames a time and a space, a platform on which to perform an act of distributed investigation that uncovers experience, honors memory, and posits a future from which to build from those collective stories. The activation of public spaces into spaces of engagement with memory, time, and the politics of gendered violence opens the possibility of multiple storytelling that creates new forms of being together. As Galeano wrote about the victims opening a door to a new cycle, these stories of victimization might also open new spaces for being together. And with that, then, I'm going to join the roundtable and continue the conversation with all of you. And I'm bringing our Hello. Oh, hi again. So I've covered a few senses, a lot of senses of For Giving Time, but there are many more. And I'm going to now pass the mic to Robert, who's going to continue the conversation, responding to senses of For Giving Time, and we're going to go around the circle, followed by question posing and responding to each other.
All right, I want to share just a couple of, literally two, of my initial responses to the proposition of For Giving Time, with an emphasis not on the forgiveness, but on the gifting. The first proposition is inspired to a large extent by Giorgio Agamben's essay in response to the question, what is the contemporary? One direction we can follow in his response is through what I would call the Labyrinth of Time. So it is to think in a sense of what is, we may think of time as something that is given to us, which indeed it is. I am very interested in where we might go if we think of what we give to time. And if we go into the labyrinth of time, we will find some pretty hungry ghosts there. What the poet Ossip Mandelstam has described as my century, my beast. He goes on to ask, who will manage to look into your eyes and weld together with his own blood the vertebrae of 2 centuries? We give to time, in this sense, our enfleshment, our materialization, our experience, and of course our deaths, and the incredible accumulation of the discarded that becomes the text of history that we are going to spend so much time struggling to decode in some way. The other direction I think of in relation to this question of what does it mean to think of us giving to time, not just time being given to us, is inspired by Nietzsche's proposition that the contemporary is defined as the untimely, the understanding of historical culture as, and this is Nietzsche's set of descriptors, an illness, a disability, and a defect, the fever of history. Historical consciousness, as opposed to historical culture, reveals the anachronistic terms of our present. Maybe what we give to time is the condition of freedom. So that is my first proposition. The second is less grand. I think of an assertion we formulated in Ultra-red about 10 years ago when we convened a series of reflections on the AIDS crisis in art spaces across the United States and Canada. We began to think of what it means to respond to crisis as a slowing down. How do we resist the conditions of urgency that generally reinforce existing terms? We might define a crisis as the situation where the convention or the capacity of the convention to hold experience is exceeded. The English word for crisis is derived from the Greek word krisis, which means decision-making. So the question for me then becomes, what does it mean to give ourselves the time in moments of crisis to reflect deeply on the terms of analysis and action that are no longer able to accommodate the contemporary events, and then to have to formulate, to give ourselves the time to formulate the new terms of analysis that will define the response to a crisis, that will in fact produce the new conditions. So 2 possible reflections is how has this country responded to fairly contemporary crises? Right. The war on terror, is this in fact a repetition or a shift in the terms of analysis? The response to the so-called economic crisis, is this a repetition or a shift in the terms of analysis?
When I think about time in the work that I do, I think about the opportunity that we have to bear witness with time and to allow a situation to unfold through time. So I grew up in between this media of these rash judgments of what is happening in my country and the things that I was looking at. And realizing that it called into action when sometimes you weren't ready for that action. What you needed was to step back and to breathe into that space and to just wait and wait to see what emerged. And so when I think about history, I think about the opportunity to just grow in awareness with time and to see what comes and work with what comes. Not necessarily digging up, but just waiting, and it'll come up, it'll surface. That's what I think about as a practice too.
Goodness, there's already a lot in the room. So I think the thing that I would like to invoke is the experience that I've had and realizing consistently being interested in public practices is the attraction to working with artists and projects and places and participants that can be termed multi-centric. So all of a sudden, there is no one point of focus that allows us all to develop one, solid experience, or one truth, or one understanding. But instead, I'm deeply attracted and inspired by projects, and we'll be looking at a lot of them tonight through our exploration, that actually structure themselves to be impossible to only experience through one way or one story, which then leads to this other concept that I learned from the artist Jana van Heeswijk. Instead of large-scale work, let's consider long-scale work.
There's a very rich field that's been opened up, and I'm thinking of your evocation of the etymology of crisis, Robert, and your sense of the idea that repetition or finding things again or excavating in a sense, or the question of long-scale work. There's one way of thinking about words like crisis, which actually come from also a very older history of words in Indo-European languages that begin with the consonant sort of combination kr, and it's chronos, it's crisis. In our words, for instance, kranti in our language, which is also a word used for revolution. So all of these suggest a certain interval, and I think there's something about that question of an interval which has to do with listening. Because listening, sound is the temporal medium par excellence. Because sound creates echoes which presume an interval, as opposed to like reflections. And in the amplitude of sound waves, we find those moments of interval and pause, which in a sense are opportunities for us to think about what listening does to our experience of time. So we're going to think a little bit in our response to listening, because it's also a reading of especially Ultra-red's interventions about listening. So this is a poster, a simple poster. It comes from an earlier period of our work, from an invitation to the Utopia Station project that was first produced many years ago I keep thinking the early 21st century. But it just says, Utopia is a hearing aid, retinas need rest, ears need sharpening, a change of register and a register of change, Subliminal, submerged sounds demand attention. Lucid dreams awaken dormant possibilities. Rarely asked questions surprise. New rhythms play on nascent frequencies. Transmit and receive. Utopia is a record of the conversations through the